5 types of fear that worsen chronic pain and symptoms. Hi everyone, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to talk about a dreaded topic, fear. No one likes fear, no one likes feeling fear, but it's important we discuss it because neuroplastic pain and symptoms is highly associated with fear. And when we're in a state of fear or dysregulation, we're much more likely to have chronic pain and symptoms being triggered and perpetuated. We enter in what we call a pain-fear cycle, or what I refer to sometimes as the sensitization cycle, where we have chronic pain or symptoms, and then we have a dysregulated response, whether it's negative beliefs or thoughts, some type of form of fear or emotional reaction, or overall nervous system dysregulation. And when we respond to our pain and symptoms with this dysregulation, it actually creates more chronic pain and symptoms in the brain. More chronic pain and symptoms, more of a sense of fear and dysregulation, more fear and dysregulation, more chronic pain and symptoms. So you can see how this negative feedback loop can keep our symptoms alive and keep them going for many years. I've seen people in this cycle for decades. Now, to change things, we don't need to change the pain or physical symptom. Get that out of your head right now. That is not what we need to do. What we need to do is deal with the fear or nervous system dysregulation that's taking place. Because if we can get that to reduce over time, naturally our chronic pain and symptoms start to reduce. So when we talk about fear, it's kind of an umbrella term. There's many forms of fear and what it can actually look like. And in this video, I'm going to talk about 5 types of fear that can keep our chronic pain and symptoms alive and worsen them over time. So let's get into it. Anticipation. Do you anticipate in certain situations or with certain movements having chronic pain or symptoms? This is important to understand. Anticipation is a form of fear. It can really keep our symptoms alive. And I relate to this a lot. When I was in chronic pain, I would anticipate being in pain in certain situations, sitting on couches, moving my arms in any way, going for a walk. But the problem becomes is that when our brain anticipates being in pain or having physical symptoms, it produces it. Our brain basically predicts that pain or symptoms make sense for that situation, so it triggers them. Even if the activity or movement or position that you're engaging in doesn't actually harm your body in any way, all it takes is for your brain to expect that pain or physical symptoms make sense for that situation. When the brain expects pain and physical symptoms, the brain produces pain and physical symptoms. Now, I have a story around this. When I was first healing, I was probably in my first month or so of a mind-body approach. And I was in Invermere, BC with my partner, Anne. We were having a good time. It was our holiday. And Anne really wanted to go rollerblading. And at this point, I was starting to move my body again, but there was a lot of fear around it. And so all of a sudden, she decided she wanted to go rollerblading at this roller rink that was in the town. And I was kind of excited at first. I was like, oh, this might be good. But then I started to anticipate, what if my back and legs start to have like a pain flare? What if something takes place? Now, the rollerblade rink was like a 5-10 minute drive away. And from the moment we decided to go rollerblading, we got into the car and we drove there. My back pain went from about a 0 to like a 7. Now, this was really good evidence of what was taking place, because for years I had assumed that movement is what was triggering my pain, That's the belief that I held. But I realized in this moment, I hadn't even really moved my body yet. I hadn't started rollerblading yet. It was the anticipation that took place. My brain expected pain makes sense for this situation, but it made an error. It started to produce the pain even before I started the movement. And so notice, are there situations that you anticipate pain or physical symptoms in? And does that ever start even before you actually engage in the movement or the physical position? Because that's great evidence that this is more of a brain and nervous system issue than a body issue. Now, how do we deal with this? Something I did early on, really consistently, is visualization. Visualization is a really useful brain retraining technique. So what I would do, and I did that maybe a little too much at first, but I would start to visualize myself being able to move my body in certain positions, do certain activities. I did a lot of visualization about weightlifting because I wanted to be able to go back to the gym and lift weights. But that was a long way off. I was 100 steps away from that. So what I started to do was visualize myself engaging in these movements, and sometimes the pain would even come on. But over time, I got really good at visualizing it, feeling safe and free in my body, leaning into nice sensations that took place. And it was a rewiring of the brain. My brain started to expect, oh, you can do this position, you can do this movement, and actually be okay. It started to expect that I was going to be safe in that situation or while doing that activity. So think about this. Is anticipation one of the driving forces of your chronic pain and symptoms? Because it's a common form of fear. And if you want to start to visualize things, that could be very helpful. Just do a little bit at a time. Sometimes the visualization can even feel too fear-provoking. So just start a little bit at a time and do it more and more, and really increase that sense of safety and positivity as you're engaging in that visualization. Catastrophizing. Do you think in worst case scenarios about your pain or physical symptoms? This is a really common form of fear. And when we start to think in worst case scenarios about our body, about how our day is going to go, about how our healing journey is going to go, it causes the danger circuits in our brain to become chronically activated, and then your nervous system becomes further dysregulated, triggering more pain and physical symptoms. I was the master of this when I was in chronic pain. Every time I would go for a walk, I would imagine my spine, my poor spine, crunching with every step, not being able to tolerate the impact of just taking a few steps forward. And I had lots of catastrophizing thoughts just about where my life was going to go. I constantly was thinking about how my pain was only going to worsen over time. I was going to be able to do less and less. I wasn't going to be able to work. I wasn't never going to be able to have kids. Now, all these predictions, all this catastrophizing thinking didn't actually turn out to be true. And I think that's important to note, is lots of people can heal themselves using a mind-body approach, but the starting place is we need to break that catastrophizing thinking. And so every time I'd have a catastrophizing thought, thinking in worst case scenarios, I would practice giving myself a message of safety. Again, this is a brain retraining technique. We're trying to retrain our brain to think differently about our body, to think differently about our pain or physical symptoms. And so whenever you notice a catastrophizing thought, practice just simply giving yourself a message of safety. You may not believe it at first, but we're just doing our best to retrain our brain in the way it thinks about our body and our physical symptoms. So really be aware of this. Start to catch throughout the day, when am I having catastrophizing thoughts? The problem is that I catastrophized about my pain so much that I wasn't even aware of it anymore. It wasn't even a news flash of the day. Me thinking about how my spine was just going to worsen over time was was not news. I did it all the time, so it became unconscious. So the starting place is you need to be very aware. When am I catastrophizing about my pain? And when the awareness comes, simply give yourself a message of safety, that your body's okay, and that you're going to be able to heal. Frustration. Are you constantly fighting against your symptoms? Getting frustrated, angry, annoyed, irritated with them? Trying to push your body through the sensations? Maybe, getting angry at the medical system. And that can be very valid, don't get me wrong. Feeling angry that we're having chronic pain or symptoms needs to be processed. It needs to be dealt with. Being angry about the medical system and how it's failed you needs to be processed and dealt with it as well. So I don't want you to push away your anger. But what happens is when we're in this fighting against our symptoms and making the pain or physical symptoms the enemy, or overall our body the enemy, it's going to actually cause further dysregulation because that sympathetic energy inside, that fight response starts to escalate, and that's going to worsen your pain and physical symptoms. This is something I needed to change really early on because I was constantly grumpy, constantly irritated with them, almost saying like mean things about my body, about my pain or physical symptoms chronically. And so one of the shifts that I needed to make was actually practicing sending love and compassion to my nervous system. This was really essential early on. Love and compassion can be very regulating, very much so. And so can you send kind messages, loving messages, compassionate messages to your brain, your nervous system, your body? Could you even talk to your pain or physical symptoms in a kind and loving way? This is something that I consistently was doing at first, and it made a big difference in my healing because I no longer made my pain or my body the enemy, and I gave up the fight. It wasn't that I was giving up. I did all the mind-body work, but I gave up fighting or being angry with my physical symptoms. And so I have a number of videos on compassion and loving kindness. I'll link one to the top here that you can check out. But a simple starting place is, can you start to talk to your pain or your physical symptoms in a compassionate way? Reminding it you know that it's trying to protect you. You know that it's the result of being in survival mode, and that your brain is doing the best it can to protect you right now and to take care of you. And even though I'm having pain or symptoms right now, I'm going to actually care for you. I'm going to bring compassion to you, and I'm not going to fight against you anymore. So this is an example of a self-kindness phrase that we can give ourselves that can support us shifting away from that fight response that we might be feeling. Obsessing. How much are you thinking about your chronic pain and symptoms every single day? Obsessing, figuring out, trying to fix our pain or symptoms, always being in our head, is a really easy way that fear sneaks into us. Obsessing is a form of fear. When you're obsessed or preoccupied with something, it keeps us in this fight or flight zone, and we often end up feeling quite distressed about the physical symptoms we're experiencing. When I was in pain, and even before I was in pain, I naturally moved towards obsessing. I'd obsess about any topic that was fear-inducing. And when all of a sudden I had chronic pain, it became a really easy thing for me to think about all the time. I was thinking about my pain probably 80-90% of the day. Every conversation I had with my partner was about our pain, which was damaging to our relationship at the time. And, the more we think about, talk about, focus on it, the worse that pain is going to become. It's important to see that connection, because before I came to a mind-body approach, I didn't see it. I wasn't aware of it at all, that me thinking about my pain or symptoms was actually worsening things. I actually thought it was me trying to figure out and come up with better solutions. But the reality is after you think about your pain or symptoms for half an hour, you're probably not going to come up with any better solution 5 hours later. It's not like, you're all of a sudden going to have a eureka moment. I can't say that word. You're not going to have this aha moment where you realize something 5 hours into thinking about your pain or symptoms. So the starting place is stepping away from obsessing and being preoccupied about our physical symptoms. And so I have a great skill that I've done a whole video on called the 3R skill. It's a skill from Pain Reprocessing Therapy. And I'll link that to the top. Because if you're listening to this and it's clear, I am constantly obsessing about my pain or physical symptoms, in my experience in working with people, that needs to shift. That needs to shift over time to actually have the pain or physical symptoms reduce. You can do all the emotional work, you can do all the trauma work, you can create a sense of safety, but if you keep sticking in your mind, obsessing and thinking about the symptoms, your brain just keeps producing them. And so practice the 3R skill, really get into it. It was a skill that I used really often when I was healing, and it supported in my symptoms completely becoming eliminated. Despair. Despair and the dorsal vagal system are closely linked with chronic pain and chronic symptoms. When I was in pain, especially at the end of my journey, I felt a lot of despair. I felt hopeless, helpless, and I was very much shut down in this dorsal vagal place. And I needed to shift that to actually start to have my symptoms reduce over time. Now, when we talk about despair in the dorsal vagal system, sometimes we don't think about it as a form of fear, but it very much is. When we think about that dorsal vagal system, we are immobilized, but we're immobilized with fear. So we're shut down, but we're shut down with a sense of fear. And so when you're in that dorsal vagal system for a prolonged period of time, chronic pain, chronic fatigue, and other physical symptoms are often the result. And when I was healing, I did a lot of nervous system regulation work. Now, this doesn't mean just shift out of despair, out of the dorsal vagal system and always be calm. I actually needed to approach that dorsal vagal system, learn to approach it with a sense of safety in my body, be with it, and then also use somatic practices and breath work to help my system regulate, become more flexible so I could shift out of it. Especially in the first couple of months of my healing, I did a lot of this work because I was in such a shut down place. And if I remained there, my pain would have never reduced. So I had to do a lot of work to regulate my nervous system, actually approach that dorsal vagal system, and bring on more of that ventral vagal system of safety and connection. Now, I have a great video on 7 steps to regulating your nervous system that I actually did last week, so I'll link that up to the top. If you're finding yourself in this dorsal vagal place, this is a great video for you to check out. It's kind of a regulating the nervous system 101, and it'll give you lots of ideas. So I hope this video was helpful. If you're comfortable, share down below in the comments what type of fear you're currently struggling with when it comes to your chronic pain and symptoms. This can be helpful for me and gives me other ideas of future videos that I need to focus on. So, take care.